Shalom. Signs of the Times, Part 4. In the first 3 parts, we talked about scoffers, ungodly passions, deception, wars, nationalism, famines, earthquakes, lawlessness, love grown cold, pestilences or pandemics, drugs and alcohol, knowledge, the great city, our global village, Gospel of the Kingdom as a testimony to make disciples of all nations, falling away, lukewarm, total nuclear destruction, pollution, global warming, extreme weather, and dragnet internet data. And so we're going to go to part 4, and we start with point number 23, right-wing populism. Right-wing populism. In Revelation 13 verse 8 it says, "And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him," and him, that's the beast, that's the charismatic world leader, that's the Antichrist, the end-time dictator, the great dictator, "shall worship him whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world." So they shall worship him. And what we see now is that there is right-wing populism is on the rise. Also left-wing, but especially right-wing populism. And it says here the following: right-wing populism, also called national populism and right-wing nationalism, is a political ideology which combines right-wing politics and populist rhetoric and themes. The rhetoric often consists of anti-elitist sentiments, opposition to the establishment, and speaking to the common people. Both right-wing populism and left-wing populism object to the perceived control of liberal democracies by elites. However, populism on the left also objects to the power of large corporations and their allies, while populism on the right normally support strong controls on immigration. And I know that many Christians, they expect that left-wing internationalism will take over the world. But I don't think so. I think it will be right-wing populism, just like it was between the 2 world wars. I see the same development straight away after the First World War. Many countries were created. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. There were new countries, and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire just fell into bits and pieces, and there were all sorts of new nations, and Czechoslovakia was created, and Yugoslavia was created, and all those countries, they started as democracies. They started as democracies. So there was a lot of democracies between around 1918 and 1919. And then one after the other, one country after the other, in Southern Europe and then Eastern Europe, they became right-wing, fascist, Nazi, right-wing populist, authoritarian regimes. They started with Mussolini and with fascism, and Hitler was a great admirer of Mussolini, and he got his own populism, and they're very nationalistic right-wing populism, but it doesn't mean they can't cooperate, because Hitler cooperated with another 7 or 8 or 9 countries to invade the Soviet Union, and there was an army of 2 million men that invaded the Soviet Union on the 22nd of June 1941 in Operation Barbarossa. So I think it will be a charismatic leader from the right who will come on the populist tide, who will become the world's the charismatic leader, the world dictator. If we look at Napoleon and Mussolini and Hitler, they were populist leaders from the right who always had an association with the church, that gave them power, and the church gave them power, and they would give privileges to the church. So I think growing populism is a sign that the end is near, because the end-time dictator will come on a surge of populism. Then point 24, cashless society. It says in Revelations 13 verse 16 to 17, also it causes all, both small and great, that's the beast, that's the great world dictator, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. And I've always thought, how is it possible that there will be so much power that you can't buy or sell? Because there's always a black market. You can always buy and sell goods on the black market. So, but then if there is no cash, if no one wants cash, and if there's a cashless society, then of course then you can't have a black market like that either. And it says here in Wikipedia, a cashless society describes an economic state whereby financial transactions are not conducted with money in the form of physical banknotes or coins, but rather through the transfer of digital information, usually an electronic representation of money, between the transacting parties. Cashless societies have existed from the time when human society came into existence, based on barter and other methods of exchange. And cashless transactions have also become possible in modern times using credit cards, debit cards, mobile payments, and digital currencies such as Bitcoin. And so we're more and more we're going towards this cashless society. And it says also centralized control. Opponents point out that an entirely cashless system, in addition to tracking all transactions, would enable a central government to enforce a transaction tax on every person to person payment, and totalitarian regimes could conduct more effective mass surveillance and quickly prevent certain individuals from buying anything or earning any money. So, and that's the world dictator, that's the Antichrist. That will be a totalitarian regime. And like it says here, he will have the power to quickly prevent certain individuals from buying anything or earning any money. Point 25, QR codes and COVID-19 passport. We saw the metadata dragnet and the CCTV cameras in the cashless society, and the QR passport for COVID, on other things. All this gives power to the government. It gives power to the government. And it will give total power to a totalitarian state. And now we have a QR passport in the Netherlands, and you can't visit you can't visit the zoo, restaurants, or cultural venues. You can't unless you have this QR passport. So these, this QR thing is of course very handy for information, and it's sort of a very handy tool. But like many handy tools, it can fall in the wrong hands, and then it will give total political power to the Antichrist. Something along those lines is point 26, hacking, ransomware, cyber warfare. I think the major countries in the end times will be the EU. They will grow out even more to the United States of Europe. These are the feet of Daniel 2. We'll talk about it later. Russia is Gog and Magog. And China we read in Revelation about 200 million coming from the east. Now at the moment, the United States is the most powerful nation on earth, economically, by GNP, gross national product, and also militarily. They're far the strongest in the world. But it's an open society and it's easy to hack. In Wikipedia it says on May 7th, 2021, Colonial Pipeline, an American oil pipeline system that originates in Houston, Texas, and carries gasoline and jet fuel mainly to the southeastern United States, suffered a ransomware cyber attack that impacted computerized equipment managing the pipeline. In response, Colonial Pipeline Company halted all of the pipeline's operations to contain the attack. With the assistance of the FBI, Colonial Pipeline paid the requested ransom, some $4.4 million, within several hours after the attack. The hackers then sent Colonial Pipeline a software application to restore the network, but it operated very slowly. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration issued a regional emergency declaration for 17 states and Washington, D.C. to keep fuel supply lines open on May 9. It was the largest cyber attack on an oil infrastructure target in the history of the United States. The FBI and various media sources identified the criminal hacking group DarkSide as the responsible party. And this DarkSide company, the group, they are based in Eastern Europe or in Russia. And of course, people like that, they can be, they can be arrested by the authorities of a totalitarian regime in Europe or in Russia, and they will say, well, you start hacking for us, and it will be hacking not for a ransom, it will be hacking so we can destroy things, so we can sort of shut things down, and maybe sort of we will see things in future that even the Pentagon will be hacked. So there's not a nuclear attack necessary, or in the first place, but in the first we would have a cyber war attack from other nations like China or the EU or Russia. Point 27, talking about the EU. Point 27, the EU, the feet of clay and iron. And Daniel 2, you have this statue of, the head of gold, this Babylonia, and then there is the arms, the chest of silver, that's the Persians, the Medes and the Persians, and then there's the thighs and the belly of bronze, and that's the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great, which fell into 4 bits, and then we have the legs of iron, and they are the Roman Empire. So we got this, but something that the Roman Empire, that the feet of clay, these legs are very long. Legs are very long, are very, very big part of a statue, and that's the Roman Empire through history, because the Roman Empire became a Christian empire in the 4th century, and this Christian empire was, half of it was Roman Catholic and half of it was Eastern Orthodox, and they went on, and this, the eastern part of this empire existed till 1453. Then Constantinople fell. That was the last bit of the Eastern Roman Empire. And this Western Empire, which fell in 476, it was revived in 800 with the crowning of Charlemagne on Christmas Day in Rome. He was crowned emperor. Emperor of what? Emperor of the western part of the Roman Empire. And the eastern part of the Roman Empire, there was Queen Irene. And there was even, Charlemagne was even thinking of getting married to her, but she didn't want it. She thought he was a barbarian. But there was sort of some thought of even reuniting the 2 different parts. And all those empires, those Christian empires through history, they have been revivals of those 2 iron legs. The empire that was started by Charlemagne in 800 lasted 1,000 years. 1,000 years. That's the Holy Roman Empire. It's called the Holy Roman Empire, And um, Hitler saw that as the first, because it was mainly, the main part of it was Germany and Switzerland and Austria and great parts of Italy. And Hitler saw that as the First Reich, the First Reich. And then, of course, there was this interlude of the Republic of Weimar. Sorry, before that, we got all the Bismarck. He united all the bits and pieces of Germany, and then Wilhelm I, who was king of Prussia, he became emperor of this German empire, and that's called, that was seen as the Second Empire by Hitler. And that's why his empire, when he conquered Europe, his empire was called Das Dritte Reich, the Third Empire. And it's a third empire because the Holy Roman Empire is the first, and then the empire of the Hohenzollerns is the second, and then the rule of Hitler, those 12 years, is the Third Reich. And why did he talk about 1,000 years? Well, the Holy Roman Empire had lasted 1,000 years as well, from 800 till 1804. In 1804, Napoleon forced the Austrian emperor, who was emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, he forced him to give up the title, because Napoleon saw himself as a direct descendant of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar, and that's why, of course, Napoleon was about to conquer the world as well. And these are very good examples of the end time and dictator, of the world dictator that we're going to have. Napoleon and Hitler, they wanted to conquer as many countries as possible, and they wanted to rule the world. And so we have this EU now, and this EU, that's at the bottom of this statue. We have the feet of clay, the feet of iron and clay. And it says, like Daniel 2 verse 41, Daniel explains, he says to King Nebuchadnezzar, "And as you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle." Now, so it will end in 10 feet, but some people say, well, it can't be the EU because there's more than 10 feet, there's more than 10 nations. But the thing is, the EU will, out of the EU, those 10 toes will come forward. Out of the EU will come forward those 10 toes, those 10 nations who will give the power that they have. They will be populist nations, right-wing populist nations. They will give their power to this dictator for a short while, it says in Revelation. And you mustn't just look at the 10 toes. You also have to look at the whole feet. A foot has 26 bones. A foot has 26 bones, and that times 2, you have 52 bones in the 2 feet. And the toes, they have 14 bones, and that times 2, you have 28 bones in the toes. So, and then you've got all the sinews and the flesh and the muscles. So there's a lot more than just 10 toes in those feet. The whole feet are clay and iron. And it says here on the internet, now Europe includes 51 independent states. So there are, there's different sort of opinions about how many countries there are in Europe. Some say 44, some say 46, some say 49, some say 51. There's lots of big ones and small ones, big states and small states, and it's the same in feet. There's lots of big bones and small bones, and together they form these beautiful feet that can move and on which we can walk. Now the EU is a great power. It's very strong. It's about 450 million people, so it's nearly 500 million people. That's power. And it's the second economic power after the United States. It's a big economical power. And the economical power, will be translated sooner or later into military power. And if we just look at economics, these are figures from 2017. The USA had a GDP of $19.4 trillion. The EU had a GDP of $17.3 trillion. And China had a GDP of $12.2 trillion. And just for comparison, on the fourth place we have Japan, $4.9 trillion. But you see that the EU is economically speaking, it's a giant. It's very strong, but it's brittle like clay. Why is it brittle? Well, because it's all those different nations with different languages, with different cultures, with a history of wars with each other. So it's, on the one hand, it's strong, and on the other hand, it's brittle, and that's why it's those 2 feet, and that's why the EU is point number 27, sign number 27, that the end is close. The more the EU gets together and the more they move forward, the more we get closer to the end. Point 28 is the return of Judah, the 2 tribes, the Jews. After Solomon, the kingdom was split into 2 parts, and Rehoboam in the south, he got 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, and most of the priests and the Levites, they went down south as well. And the 10 northern tribes, they went to Jeroboam. Jeroboam, he became the king of the 10 northern tribes. But Judah has the Jews, so the Jews are descendants of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, of those 3 tribes. And the other 10 tribes, they disappeared into history after 722 BC. But it's important that the Jews are back in the land to fulfill prophecy, because it says in this well-known chapter of Zechariah 14, which is about the return of Christ, "Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, when the spoil taken from you will be divided in the midst of you. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women ravished. Half of the city shall go into exile, but the rest of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as when he fights on the day of battle. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives, which lies before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two, from east to west by a very wide valley, so that half of the mount shall withdraw northward and the other half southward." And these verses are quoted very often. And also, especially amongst Sabbath keepers and churches of God and Messianic Jews, the last bit is also quoted very often about all the nations going up, the survivors of the nations going up to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. But in verse 14 it says, "And Judah also shall fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the heathen round about shall be gathered together, gold and silver and apparel in great abundance." Well, for that to make it possible, they have to be there. And over the past 150 years, many Jews have returned to Jerusalem. And 45% of all the Jews, of all Jewry, 45%, according to one source on the internet, 45% of the Jews live in the state of Israel now. They live in Israel. And it's important that part of Judah returned to the land, in 539 BC, at the time of Cyrus the Great, to rebuild the temple and to be in the lands, because they had to be in the lands, 5 centuries later, to welcome the Messiah, so that Jesus could be born in a Jewish family and live in the land and go up to the temple, that the glory of the Lord would come to the temple, and that was him, that was Jesus, and that he was there. And the temple was there all the time that he lived, and 40 years after he went to heaven, the temple disappeared, and you got all those Jewish wars, and the Jews were ousted from the land. But it was important that part of Jewry was in the land to welcome their Messiah, even if that most of them did not realize it was their Messiah. And he was there. He came there, and they were in the land, and that was important. That many Jews were in the land at the time of Christ. Otherwise, he could not have been born in Bethlehem to start with. And it's also important that a part of, not all the Jews, but at least a part of the Jews are back in the land, and that they have political power, that they're able to fight. They're able to fight, because it says here in verse 14, and Judah shall fight at Jerusalem. When? At return. At return, when all the nations go up to Jerusalem, Judah will also fight at Jerusalem. Point 29, the 6,000 years. We read about the millennium in Revelations 20, verse 1 till 7. And then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it and sealed it over him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were ended. After that he must be loosed for a little while. So we read, the 1,000 years are mentioned 6 times in Revelations 20. So if the seventh millennium, if that millennium, the peaceful world tomorrow, the millennium, the new world, the Olam Haba, the world to come, if that is 1,000 years, and if that's peace, every Sabbath, we Sabbath keepers, we say Shabbat Shalom, a peaceful Sabbath. And the Sar Shalom, the Prince of Peace, will rule those 1,000 years. So it's a sabbatical. And 2 Peter 3 verse 8 says, but do not ignore this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day. So if the millennium is 1,000 years under Christ, because Satan is ousted and Christ is there, then the 6,000 years are of course, then there are of course 6,000 years for the 6 work days, for the 6 creation days. There were 6 days of creation, and the 6 days of creation, and the Sabbath day. There's 6 working days, and then there's the Sabbath day. So there's 6,000 years under Satan, and there's 1,000 years under Christ. There's 6,000 years of wars, and there's 1,000 years of peace. There's 6,000 years of sickness, and 1,000 years of healing. There's 6,000 years of want, and 1,000 years of plenty. And we're about at the end of the 6,000 years. If you add up all the genealogies from Adam till Abram, and if you add to that the 430 years from the promise to Abram to the Sinai covenant, and then the 480 years from the Sinai covenant to the building of the temple, you come to Solomon, and with Solomon you come to we know by secular history when Solomon should have lived. Then if you add these all up, then you come close to the number 6,000. The year 6,000 will be somewhere between now and 2050. So we can calculate that. Not exactly, but not exactly, because the 430 years do the start, when Abram was 70, when he left Ur of the Chaldees, or when he was 75, when he left Haran. And with Adam and Seth and Enoch and Noah, they were at a certain age, and they became a father of a son, so 150, but it doesn't mention the months, maybe 3 months, and maybe the next one 150 and 4 months. So all those months that passed by, we don't know, maybe there's another extra 5 or 10 or 15 years that passed by. So we can calculate it approximately, but not exactly. But some may say, what about the Hebrew year 5,782? 5,782. The Seder Olam Harabah, Wikipedia says the following about the Seder Olam Rabbah, because that's where we get this number, this number from. The Great Order of the World is a 2nd century AD Hebrew language chronology detailing the dates of biblical events from the creation to Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia. Tradition considers it to have been written about 160 AD by Jose ben Halafta, but it was probably also supplemented and edited at a later period. So we have this date from the Seder Olam Rabbah, but there's 2 big mistakes in the Seder Olam Rabbah. To start with the 70 weeks of Daniel 9 verse 24. 70 weeks are 490 days, and those 490 days, they are 490 years. And according to the Seder Olam Rabbah, those 490 years, they were between the first destruction of the temple and the second destruction of the temple. But in reality, we know from secular history that there is 655 years between the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC and the second temple in 70 AD. So there is 655 years. Well, if you subtract 490 from 655, you end up with 165 years which have to be added because they don't count them. They're left out. The second mistake is that the Seder Olam Haba makes Terach 70 years old when Abram was born. This is understandable because it says so in Genesis 11 verse 26. When Terach had lived 70 years, he became the father of Abram, Nahor and Haran. So he was 70 years old, but he was not. He was 70 years old when he became a father, and then the 3 sons are mentioned in the order of importance. And the Bible often does that. It does that so with Jacob and Esau. Jacob is not the oldest, Esau is. It never says Esau and Jacob, it always says Jacob and Esau. And it does the same with Sam, Ham and Japheth. Shem is not, he's not the oldest. He's the second one, as a matter of fact. He's the middle one. And so often the Bible mentions the most important person first. And from the New Testament we can know for sure that Terah was 130 years old when Abram was born, because Terah died in Haran at the age of 205. The Old Testament says so. And Abram left Haran at 75. He left Haran when he was 75 years old. So Abram waited for his father's death. But that's not mentioned in the Old Testament, that Abram waited for his father's death. But it is mentioned in the New Testament, in this discourse of Stephen just before he is stoned to death. He says in Acts 7 verse 4, "Then Abram departed from the land of the Chaldeans and lived in Haran. And after his father died, God removed Abram from there into this land in which you are now living." So he didn't leave Haran until the death. And from the Old Testament we know Terah died at 205 and Abram left at 75. So if you deduct those, that means that Terah was 130 years old when Abram was born. So 60 years must be added. Now, if you add to the Hebrew calendar year 5782, the 165 and the 60, you get to 6007. So you get to 6007 AM. Then we would have already the 7th year of the 7th millennium. Well, I think there will probably be some more mistakes in that Seder Olam Haba, Seder Olam Rabbah. I don't think we are there yet. I don't think we are at this, but it shows that we're very close to the year 6000, and I think the year 6000 will be somewhere in the coming 10 to 20 years. Point number 30 is after 2 days. after 2 days, after 2000 years. And this is something I want to apply from Hosea 6 verse 1 and 2. Come, let us return to the Lord. And this is said, you know, by the 2-tribe nation, by the 10-tribe nation, and by everyone who wants to repent to the Lord. For he has torn that he may heal us. He has stricken and he will bind us. After 2 days he will revive us. On the 3rd day he will raise us up, that we may live before him. So after 2000 years he will revive us, and on the 3rd day, in the 3rd millennium, he will raise us up. And this I think this applies to the resurrection of the believers at the coming of Christ. This is the revival of 10-tribe Israel, and this is the conversion of 2-tribe Judah. So it will be after 2000 years. Well, if you sort of look at the time that Jesus Christ died, and that he was resurrected, and that he went to heaven, that he ascended to heaven, that happened, you know, somewhere from 33 AD. Some say 30, some say 31, some say 33. It can't have happened before, and it can't have happened after, because of other factors that you have to take into consideration. It was somewhere between 30 and 33 that the death and resurrection and ascension of Christ happened. So if you take 2000 years from that, then you come to 2030, 2033. That means that the 2000 years, the 2000, it says, you know, after 2 days he will revive us. So if you apply that to the church, because then of course the day of Pentecost was, you know, it was 10 days after the ascension of Christ. So if the revival of the church, if you know, the resurrection of the church is going to be after 2000 years, then that's only possible from the moment of 2030. I'm not saying that it will happen at 2030, it can happen at 2040. 2040 is still on the 3rd day, in the 3rd millennium. But so this is interesting to see that the 6,000 years, they end somewhere in the coming 20 years. And it's interesting to see that the 2000 year, the 2 days of Hosea 6, they end somewhere at around 2030. So, you know, if we take all these things, these 30 points into consideration, I think that we can expect a return of Jesus Christ in the coming 10 to 20 years. I don't know when exactly, but I think sort of all the signs point to the fact that it's going to be soon, in the coming 10 to 20 years. Is this good news? Well, yes and no. It will be a lot of trouble come ahead. You know, the Great Tribulation and sort of all the wars and all the famines and everything will happen. Those are the woes. Those are the difficult trials and tribulations that we have to go through, and that you know, that will have to happen for humanity. The good thing will be that at the end of that, Christ will come. He will oust Satan. He will save humanity from self-destruction. He will save the remnant of Judah. He will save the remnant of Israel. And the church, the people in the church, they will be resurrected, and they will meet him in the air, and they will rule with him. They will reign with the Lord. They will reign with Jesus Christ. And that's an important thing for you now. Sort of, you know, have you given your life to Jesus Christ? Because if you haven't, do so today. Because whether you live in the Middle Ages, or whether you lived 100 years ago, or whether you were to live, you know, 10 years ago, or whether you're living now, or whether you will live in 10 years' time, if you have chosen for Christ, if you've given your life to God, your life to Christ, then you have nothing to fear. So I'm hoping that you will give your life to Christ if you haven't done so. So, only thing I can say, Maranatha, Maranatha, come Lord, come soon. Amen.